Pack your things and run. Don't trust your son. I've already called the police, and they're on their way to your house right now. Please, Reginia, get out. If that message had been just 7 words, I might have convinced myself it was a cruel prank. But the long, desperate text shattered that hope. At 2:03 in the morning, Alton's deep, urgent voice tore me out of a dead sleep over the phone. Torch. Before I could even choke out a single question, the line went completely dead. His voice was the only thing piercing through the dark. No casual greeting, no explanation beyond the terror in his voice. Before I could even catch my breath to respond, he was gone. My name is Reginia Corwin. I am 61 years old, and I've been a widow for exactly 3 months. Torch. I'm still trying to adjust to sleeping alone in a king-sized bed built for 2. 3 days earlier, I met Alton at our local Kroger. He seemed like a gentleman, showing a rare kind of patience for an older woman who was just trying to figure out her next step in life. We talked easily, like 2 old friends catching up. I never asked him for anything other than a little human connection. Torch. But the voice on the phone tonight didn't sound like the friendly man who had joked with me in the produce section. He sounded like someone bracing for a catastrophe he was powerless to stop. I called him back. It rang twice before going straight to voicemail. I sat in the pitch-black room, staring at the glowing screen, as if waiting long enough would force it to offer up an explanation. Torch. It didn't. I don't know what made me listen to him so completely. Maybe it was the unmistakable tremor in his voice when he said my son's name. Or maybe it was just common sense. Down here in the South, a sensible man doesn't call 911 for a stranger based on a vague bad feeling. You don't make a call like that unless you know something terrible is about to happen. So, I got up. Torch. I didn't turn on a single light. I felt my way through the dark, putting on the clothes closest to the bed, grabbing my purse, my high blood pressure pills, and the heavy old Miglite flashlight my late husband, Dwayne, always kept in the nightstand. Then, I slipped out the back door like a fugitive running from her own home. I didn't go far. Torch. I cut across the lawn and knocked on my neighbor Patricia's door. We've been neighbors for 11 years. Before my hand even dropped from the door, she pulled it open. Good Lord, Reginia, what happened to you? I don't know yet, I said. It was the absolute truth. She didn't ask a second question. Torch. She pulled me inside, locked the door, threw the deadbolt and chain, and sat me down at her kitchen table. She acted like a woman who had been waiting her whole life for trouble to show up on her doorstep. We sat in that kitchen for nearly 3 hours. Patricia brewed sweet tea, but neither of us touched a drop. Torch. I kept checking my phone, half hoping Alton would call back and tell me I had overreacted, that it was safe to go home. He never called. At 5 o'clock on the dot, my phone rang again. This time, it wasn't Alton. Mrs. Corwin, this is the Montgomery Police Department. Are you in a safe location right now? I'm safe. What happened? Is it my house? There was a heavy silence on the line. Torch. The kind of silence that drops your stomach into your shoes before the other person even speaks. Ma'am, our officers moved in on your residence about 20 minutes ago. We've taken 2 armed men into custody inside your home. I gripped the edge of Patricia's table until my knuckles turned white. 2 men, I repeated, slowing my words down as if that would make the absurdity make sense. Torch. Tonight, inside my house. Yes, ma'am. We're still investigating their exact motives for being there. I need you to stay right where you are for now. I pulled the phone away from my ear. Patricia was staring at me, waiting, but I couldn't find the words. My mind was completely consumed by Alton's call at 2 in the morning. How could he have called the police before he even warned me? Torch. How did he know to act before any of this took place? And in that dark, quiet hour, 2 armed strangers had been standing in the room where I was supposed to be sleeping. My face must have betrayed every ounce of terror. I couldn't speak out loud, because Patricia reached across the table and took my hand, squeezing it tight without asking a single thing. Torch. You spend more time picking out apples than anyone I've ever seen. I looked up from the produce display, embarrassed, like I'd been caught doing something private. A man stood a few feet away, pushing a half-full cart. His smile was warm, completely lacking any pushy pickup line. It felt more like he had simply noticed me, the way you notice someone who looks lonely. Porch. I like knowing what I'm paying for, I answered. Smart lady. He extended a hand. Alton Winford. Reginia. That was 3 days before the phone call that changed everything. That exact day marked 3 months since my husband Dwayne passed away. If I'm honest with myself, grief was still an invisible hand squeezing my throat. Porch. He'd been gone long enough that people stopped asking how I was doing with hushed voices. But not long enough for me to stop expecting him to walk through the front door at 6 o'clock every evening. Alton didn't rush me. We stood in that grocery aisle and talked for 20 minutes. Nothing heavy, just casual small talk to fill the silence. Porch. He mentioned he had known Dwayne years ago through a mutual friend. He said it so casually that I didn't think twice about it. He was a good man, Alton said softly. I was really sorry to hear about his passing. I didn't ask how he'd heard. Grief makes you grateful for company. It doesn't make you suspicious. Before we parted ways, he brought up something trivial, almost like a passing thought. Porch. You ought to get that light on your back porch fixed. Someone walking up there in the dark could easily trip and hurt themselves. I laughed it off at the time, but I had never mentioned my back porch light was out. I had never even told him I had a back porch. Later that evening, my son, Ravel, showed up unannounced. Porch. He'd been doing that a lot since his father died, using the spare key I had never bothered to ask back. Mom, we need to talk about getting your affairs and finances straightened out. He set a heavy manila folder on the kitchen table, his tone leaving no room for argument. Power of attorney, just in case, he said. In case of what, Ravel? I'm not sick. You're grieving, Mom. Porch. You're not thinking clearly right now. His voice was soft, like he was reasoning with a child who had wandered into traffic. Let me handle things. That's all I'm asking. I was taking care of myself long before I raised you, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. When I'm ready to sign anything, I'll let you know. He didn't argue. Porch. He just looked at me the same way his father used to look at an unpaid debt. Patient and entirely certain he would get what he wanted in the end. He left the folder on the table when he walked out. Just think about it, he said. I'm only trying to protect you. I shoved the folder into a drawer and didn't open it again. Lying in bed that night, my mind didn't drift to Ravel. Porch. It went back to Alton. There was a lightness to him that I hadn't allowed myself to feel in months. A man who knew my husband's name, making me laugh in a grocery store when I hadn't laughed in weeks. I told myself that was all it was. A kind stranger, a small coincidence, a throwaway comment about a porch light. But lying there in the dark, I couldn't stop turning his words over in my head. Porch. You ought to get that light on your back porch fixed. I had never told him the light was broken. I had never told him I had a back porch. At 8 the next morning, the police gave me permission to go back inside my house. Strangely, it didn't look like a crime scene at all. There was no shattered glass, no rummaged drawers, no overturned furniture. Porch. My living room was exactly as I had left it, except for the yellow tape draped across my own front door and the strange dusting of fingerprint powder on the knob. Everything appears untouched, Mrs. Corwin, the officer said, as if that were supposed to bring me comfort. It doesn't look like anything was taken. Standing in my own hallway, I felt colder than I had at any point during the night. Porch. How did they get inside? I hadn't heard glass break. The alarm hadn't gone off, and it had taken nearly 3 hours for anyone to catch them. Why? A tall man in plain clothes walked toward me, introducing himself as Detective Marcus Doggett. He spoke in a measured, deliberate tone, weighing every single word before letting it cross his lips. Porch. Based on information we received, our officers had this address under surveillance shortly after 2 in the morning, he said. We didn't rush the home right away, because we needed to see who showed up and verify the situation before moving in. Once those men stepped inside, it confirmed the tip. That's when we moved. I know the weight must have felt unbearable from where you were sitting. Orch. So you knew about this before they even got here. We had reason for concern. That's as much as I can share right now. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle before continuing. There were no signs of forced entry. The locks weren't picked, and no windows were broken. Whoever let them in either had a key or someone gave them access. A key? Orch. Detective Doggett, the only person I ever gave a spare key to is my son. He didn't reply directly, but I saw a faint shift in his eyes, a subtle realization he quietly filed away. Both of those men have criminal records. We're still working to determine exactly what they were doing here and how they got inside. What does that mean? They broke into my house just to stand around? Orch. It means the investigation is ongoing, he said gently but firmly. I know that's not the answer you want right now. I wanted to grab him by the shoulders and demand answers. But he simply handed me his business card, telling me to call him immediately if I remembered anything unusual. Any strangers, any arguments, or anyone who might want me out of this house, or had access to it. Orch. My mind flashed to the folder Ravel had left in my kitchen drawer, but I kept my mouth shut. Ravel arrived 20 minutes later, breathless, looking like he had run every red light in the city to get there. Mom! He pulled me into a hug so tight I almost lost my footing. Are you hurt? Did they touch you? Where were you? I called the house 3 times. I wasn't home, honey. I'm okay. Orch. He stepped back, scanning my face. His expression didn't look like relief. It looked like he was searching for something. Not home at 2 in the morning? Where were you? At Patricia's. I had a bad feeling, so I left. A bad feeling, he repeated slowly, weighing the words. You left your own house just because of a bad feeling? Ravel, I don't need to explain myself to. Orch. That's not what I meant, Mom. His tone softened. I just need to understand. Who told you to leave? The concern in his voice vanished, replaced by an urgent need for an answer. Nobody told me anything. I lied. It was just a hunch. He nodded slowly, staring at me a second longer than necessary, before putting his caring facade back on. As long as you're safe. He squeezed my hand. Orch. You should come stay at my place for a while. I'll think about it. Don't think too long, he said with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. I don't want anything happening to you when I'm not around to protect you. All through the afternoon, long after he had gone, I tried to convince myself his words came from a place of love. Orch. But that phrase stayed stuck in my chest like a thorn. When I'm not around to protect you. No matter how many times I replayed it, I couldn't make it sound as tender as he intended. I found the receipt while searching for my reading glasses. It had slipped deep into the back of the junk drawer, folded so many times the paper was worn smooth. Orch. It was from a hardware store, with Dwayne's handwriting scrawled across the back. New locks. Don't tell Elle. I sat at the kitchen table and didn't move for a long time. Back then I didn't understand. Now, I did. It had been a Tuesday evening while Dwayne was still alive and healthy, sitting across from me at this exact table with his reading glasses pushed up on his head. Orch. Ravel had brought over a folder. Not the one he brought recently, but an earlier one, before I knew what those legal documents looked like. It's just practical, Dad. You and Mom aren't getting any younger. If something happens, I need to be able to step in quickly. Step in for what? Dwayne hadn't even looked up from his newspaper. We're not dying tomorrow, son. Orch. That's not what Ravel caught himself, softening his voice the way he always did when a direct approach failed. I'm just trying to protect this family. Is there something wrong with that? Protecting us and controlling us are 2 different things, Dwayne said, finally looking up. I raised you to ask for things directly, not work behind my back. Orch. Ravel left that night without any signed papers. I remembered feeling embarrassed for him, telling Dwayne he was being too hard on our son, that Ravel was just trying to help. Dwayne hadn't argued with me. He just went quiet, a heavy silence that was completely out of character for him. Orch. Later that week, I found him at his workbench in the garage, changing the lock on the back door himself instead of calling a locksmith. "Dwayne, what are you doing? It's almost 10 at night." "Just replacing it," he said, not stopping his screwdriver or looking up. "To keep who out? The lock works fine. Nobody's trying to break in." Porch. He was silent for a moment, turning the screw much slower than necessary. "Something's not right with him lately, Reginia." "With who? Ravel?" I laughed a little too quickly. "He's just worried about us. He wants to help. I know what worry looks like. This isn't worry." He set the screwdriver down and finally met my eyes. In the dim garage light, he looked older than I had ever seen him. Porch. "I called an old friend, asked him to keep an eye on a few things until I figure out what's going on." "What friend? What things? Don't worry about it right now. I could be wrong." He picked the screwdriver back up. "I hope I'm wrong." I didn't press him further. Porch. I told myself he was just exhausted, paranoid from the grief of losing his mother, and that Ravel was simply a son trying too hard to please his parents. 2 weeks later, Dwayne passed away. I buried him without ever asking who that old friend was, or what he had meant. Now, sitting at the very same table with that receipt in my hand, I finally faced what I had refused to see back then. Porch. I hope I'm wrong. That was the last real conversation my husband and I ever had about our son, and for 3 full months, I had forced myself to believe it meant nothing. "You mean to tell me you fell asleep in church?" A grown woman sitting in the 3rd row, snoring? I was not snoring. I swatted his arm across the kitchen table, laughing so hard I had to set my fork down. Porch. I just closed my eyes during the sermon. That's entirely different. "Your neighbor poked you twice with her elbow, Reginia." Patricia exaggerates. It had been 3 weeks since the break-in. Porch. Alton had fallen into a routine of coming over in the evenings, usually bringing something small, a roasted chicken, a bag of peaches, or once, a bundle of grocery store flowers, handing them to me with a hesitant look. Tonight, he had brought gumbo. He'd made it too spicy, heavy on the cayenne, and I hadn't laughed like this in longer than I cared to admit. It felt good, dangerously good, even. Porch. Part of me, while laughing, still maintained a cautious distance from the feeling. "I haven't laughed like this since Dwayne passed," I said before I could stop myself. "It feels strange to say that out loud." Alton's smile softened into something else. "Why strange? Like I shouldn't be allowed to feel light again. Not yet, anyway." "You are allowed," he said quietly. "Dwayne would want you to." Porch. "You didn't know him well enough to say that." Something flickered across his face. Quick, fleeting, like a door cracking open just an inch before someone remembered to slam it shut. "I knew him well enough," he said, his eyes dropping to the table for a moment instead of meeting mine. "Reginia, about me, about how There are things I probably should have told you earlier," he trailed off. Porch. I watched him swallow the rest of his sentence, pulling back like someone reeling in a fishing line too fast. "About how you what?" "Nothing. Forget it." He picked up his spoon again. It was too casual, the kind of casual that couldn't fool anyone paying attention. That wasn't nothing. I know what nothing sounds like, and that wasn't it. Porch. "Alton, you can't start a sentence like that and just leave it hanging." I stared at him, refusing to let it go easily. "I like you, Alton, but I've had enough surprises this month to last a lifetime. If there's something to say it now. I will soon." "I promise," he said calmly, looking at me with an apologetic expression. Porch. "This isn't something I want to casually bring up over gumbo at the kitchen table. When I tell you, I want to tell you the whole story." I didn't like the answer, but the look on his face made me decide to drop it for the night. "Any news from the detective?" I asked, shifting the conversation toward something I could handle. Porch. "I reached out to an old contact," Alton said, stirring his soup as if it required his full concentration. "Still looking into a few things on my end. No solid evidence yet. On your end?" "What does that mean, your end of the investigation?" "You're not a police officer, Alton. What does any of this have to do with you?" "It's just..." Porch. "I know people from before," he said, waving a hand dismissively, anxious to brush off a question he didn't want asked again. I'll tell you everything, Reginia. Just not tonight. I let the subject drop, but I made a mental note of it. Like noting a crack in a foundation, even if you aren't ready to examine it closely just yet. He left shortly after 9. Porch. I walked him to the door but didn't linger like I usually did. If he noticed, he didn't say anything. About how there are things I probably should have told you earlier. I told myself it was nothing. Just a cautious man, perhaps guarding a secret that wasn't ready to be shared. I kept telling myself that all the way up the stairs and into bed. Porch. But I no longer believed the excuse as completely as I used to. Detective Marcus Doggett called before 8 the next morning, asking if he could drop by. That alone told me there had been progress. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, the exact spot where Alton had stopped mid-sentence the night before, and got straight to the point without wasting time. Porch. His name is Terrell Boykins, Marcus said. One of the 2 men found inside your home. He has a record, assault, forced entry, burglary, charges going back several years. But he isn't talking. Not talking about what, not saying why he was in your house, not saying who sent him, Marcus said bluntly, watching my reaction. We asked him directly. He offered nothing. Porch. Just sat there with his arms crossed, telling us we had to prove it ourselves. Even without seeing it, I could picture the scene clearly. A man in a gray interrogation room, setting his jaw, defying anyone sitting across the table trying to make him talk. Marcus described him as unusually calm, a quiet composure that troubled the officers far more than shouting would have. Porch. He wasn't scared, he wasn't confused. He was a man who knew exactly what he couldn't afford to say. So, he just sat there, I said. That's it? That's all we get? Not quite. Marcus set a folder on the table, though he didn't open it immediately. We recovered a phone from him at the scene. A prepaid burner phone bought with cash. My chest tightened. Porch. Right, he said, finally opening the folder and sliding a printed sheet toward me. It contained rows of dates, times, and numbers. Looking at them meant nothing to me on their own. In the hours leading up to the break-in, there were calls on this phone. 2 calls, short ones, both coming from the exact same number. Whose number? We don't know yet. Porch. The registered name is a dead end, false information, likely purchased the same way. He tapped the paper. But we're tracing the purchase location and pulling cell tower records to pinpoint where the phone was when those 2 calls were made. I stared at the timestamps, as if looking hard enough would make them spell out an answer. So, someone called him twice, right before it happened. Porch. Right before, Marcus confirmed. Which tells us this wasn't random. Whoever made those calls knew precisely when to signal 2 armed men to move. And you can't trace who it was. These things take time to trace completely, Mrs. Corwin. I know that's not what you want to hear. Porch. I sat with that fact for a long time, tilting the paper toward the light, as if sheer focus could force it to reveal something. 2 calls, a tiny window of time, and someone who knew down to the minute when 2 violent men should make their move. The second call, Marcus added almost as an afterthought, pointing to the last line on the page, came in at 1:54 a.m. Porch. I couldn't stop my mind from doing the math. Alton had called me at 2:03 a.m. 9 minutes. I didn't say the words out loud, nor did I let my face reveal the terrifying logic my mind had quietly pieced together. 2 numbers, 9 minutes apart, one belonging to a stranger who knew my husband's name before I ever spoke it. Porch. Marcus gathered his folder to leave, promising to update me the moment the trace results came back. I saw him to the door and thanked him, all while those 9 minutes hung over me like a heavy weight I wasn't ready to lift. Ravel came by 4 times that week, 4 times in 7 days, more than he had visited in the entire month prior to the break-in. Porch. I brought some groceries, he said on Tuesday, setting a pile of things I hadn't asked for onto the counter. I pulled your mail from the box, too. You shouldn't be walking outside alone right now. Ravel, it's broad daylight. I can get my own mail. Humor me, Mom, he said, already unpacking plastic bags and rearranging my pantry items in his preferred order instead of mine. Porch. Until we figure out who did this, I need to make sure you're taking precautions." By Thursday, his visits had taken on a distinct pattern, one that always circled back to the same destination, though he masked it better now, wrapping it in enough concern that I almost missed it each time. "Orch, have you given any more thought to those papers?" he asked, sitting at the kitchen table in the chair Dwayne used to occupy, now treating it as his own. The power of attorney. It would make things so much easier, especially after everything you've been through. Easier for whom? For you, Mom. So someone can handle things for you while you recover from all this. That's all I want. Orch. What exactly does handling things mean? Just being able to help out whenever needed. Taking care of small details so you don't have to stress, he said smoothly, almost casually, as if it meant nothing to him. But his eyes lingered on mine a second too long, like a draft pushing through a room that was supposed to be sealed tight. Orch. I didn't fully grasp it then, but no matter how I responded, he always managed to steer the conversation back to the same request, dressed up in slightly different phrasing each time. The pattern alone had begun to set off alarm bells in my mind. That night, after he left, I did something I had never done before. I pulled out a notepad I usually used for grocery lists and turned to a fresh page. Orch. Tuesday, groceries, mail, brought up POA again. Thursday, brought up POA again. Asked twice details, dates, what he said, how he said it. I didn't know what use it would serve yet. I only knew I no longer trusted my memory to hold on to this disturbing pattern the way paper could. Alton arrived later than usual that evening. Orch. I found myself telling him about Ravel's frequent visits, and the folder still sitting quietly in the drawer. No matter what I said, my son's words, disguised as concern, always circled back to the exact same demand. Alton listened intently, far quieter than usual. Did he ever say why this was so personally important to him? No, just that he wants to help. Why? Orch. No reason given. But the way Alton looked at me wasn't his usual warmth. It was cautious, calculating. It just seems unusual to push that hard for a signature. My mind drifted back to those 9 minutes. I still lacked the courage to ask him directly. For a split second, I wondered if I was being foolish sitting there opening up to him when I still didn't know what he was hiding from me. Orch. I brushed the thought aside. He had been good to me, and Ravel was my own flesh and blood. Without concrete evidence, I convinced myself I could still tell the difference between the two men in my life. Alton left before 10. Afterward, I sat alone in the kitchen with the notebook open on the table, 3 separate entries already recorded. Orch. Ravel had asked for the exact same thing in 3 slightly different ways. I told myself I was just being careful. I was getting better at convincing myself of that, too. I hadn't touched Dwayne's document box since the funeral. Orch. It sat on the top shelf of our closet, covered in dust, filled with things I hadn't been ready to sort through. Old tax returns, warranties for long-replaced appliances, the mundane paperwork collected over a lifetime of marriage that neither person pays much attention to. That Saturday, I finally pulled it down. Orch. I told myself I needed to find the house deed to verify ownership for the insurance claim regarding the break-in. That was the excuse I gave myself, though I wasn't sure if it was my true motive. At the bottom of the box, buried beneath a stack of old bank statements, I found a manila folder I didn't recognize. Orch. Inside was a multi-page document formally typed, with blank lines waiting for signatures that had never been made. Durable power of attorney. Principal, Dwayne Corwin. Agent, Ravel Corwin. My hands froze. This wasn't the folder Ravel had brought to my kitchen table after Dwayne died. Orch. This document was dated much earlier, back when Dwayne was still alive, healthy, and sitting across from me every evening. Long before I even knew such a document needed to be drafted, someone had already drawn it up. Orch. Tucked behind the document was something I hadn't expected. A letter from a title company addressed to Dwayne, thanking him for a recent inquiry regarding a preliminary title search on our property. Dwayne had never called a title company in his life. He handled mortgages, taxes, everything about the house himself, in the most traditional, hands-on way possible. Porch. Someone had used his name to start inquiring about the title to our home without ever telling him. Sitting on the closet floor, I read through every page. Near the end of the power of attorney form, right next to the signature line, was Dwayne's hurried handwriting. Not yet. Need to think, not yet. He never got the chance to think it through. Porch. Before I even planned my next move, I dialed Detective Marcus's number. He arrived in less than an hour. I expected him to glance at the papers, maybe nod and tell me it was worth noting. Instead, he read through both documents twice, his expression hardening into something I couldn't read. "This letter from the title company," Marcus said. "Did your husband ever mention starting this process?" Porch. "Never. He would have told me. We didn't keep secrets about the house." So someone initiated a title search using his info, without him ever authorizing it. Marcus set the two files down carefully, as if a sudden move might rip them apart. I knew what Marcus looked like when he was being cautious, holding back his emotions, weighing every word. But this was different. Porch. This was a man doing math in his head, and really, really hating the total. "Mrs. Corwin, if it's all right with you, I'd like to take these two documents with me as evidence." "As evidence of what, Marcus? An unsigned form and a letter about a title search? Maybe something a lot bigger." Porch. He looked me right in the eye, his face hardening with a sharp, laser-like focus. Missing piece of puzzle had just clicked into place. I shouldn't say more until I double-check a few things. That's not an answer, I know it isn't. He slid the two files into his own folder with extreme care. "I promise you, the second I can tell you more, you'll be the very first to know." Porch. I walked him to the door. Right as he was about to step over the threshold, I asked him point blank, "Marcus, what does this mean? To be completely honest?" He paused on my porch steps, the folder tucked tight under his arm. "I think it might mean a whole lot," he said softly. "I just need to be 100% sure before I lay it out for you." He left without another word. Porch. Long after his car pulled away, I stood in the doorway, clinging to a strange, unsettling feeling that what I'd just handed him was far more than a few sheets of paper. I got used to leaving my phone face up on the kitchen table, staring at it as if I could force it to ring through sheer willpower. It never worked. The screen just sat there, black and quiet, while I aged another hour waiting. Porch. Waiting for news no one seemed ready to tell me. Not that I spent 2 straight weeks staring at the screen, even if some days felt that way. I called the banks and asked them to flag my accounts, adding an extra layer of identity verification. It was a safeguard Lavelle couldn't talk his way around, no matter how smooth he was. Porch. I sat across from a probate lawyer, a private recommendation from Marcus. The guarded woman reviewed everything I'd found in Dwayne's box of paperwork and told it to me straight. No matter where the criminal investigation goes, you need to protect your assets immediately. I left her office with a long to-do list. Change beneficiaries, restrict account access, set up deed protection. Porch. In under a week, I checked off every single item, methodically, just like Dwayne would have wanted me to. It didn't make the waiting any easier, it just gave me something solid to stand on while facing my fears. Around 4 one afternoon, a sharp knock at the door made me jump right out of my chair. I opened it to find a delivery driver holding a package. Porch. The house number on it was for 2 doors down. Before he even finished reading the label, he was apologizing for getting the wrong address. After he left, I stood in the doorway for a full minute, feeling utterly foolish as my heart hammered in my chest. 2 weeks. It had been 2 whole weeks since I gave that folder to Marcus. 2 weeks since the look on his face became something I couldn't read. Porch. Marcus called that evening. I answered so fast I nearly dropped the phone. "No official updates yet, Mrs. Corwin. I just wanted to check on you." His voice was steady and cautious as always. "The prosecutor is still negotiating with Boykins, the intruder. We're using the phone records as leverage to get him to cooperate. These things take time. I know how hard this waiting is." Porch. "You told me that 2 weeks ago, Marcus. I know I did. So what's happening? Did he confess or not? He's considering his options. That really is all I can share right now. There was a pause as he carefully weighed how much honesty I could handle. I give you my word. The second there's a real breakthrough, you'll be the first to know. Something inside me snapped, tiny but sudden. Weeks of buildup finally found a crack to burst through. I can't take this anymore, Marcus. I'm sitting here waiting, not knowing if my own son. My voice cut off before I could finish the thought. I'm sorry. I shouldn't be taking this out on you. It's all right, Mrs. Corwin. You have every right to be angry. No, I mean it. George, you've been so patient with me, and I'm yelling at you like I've lost my mind. You haven't lost anything, he said gently. You're just exhausted. There's a big difference. I apologized twice more before hanging up, thoroughly ashamed of myself. That night, Lavelle called to ask if I needed anything from the store. I told him, "No, thank you, I'm fine," and left it at that. George. I didn't tell him about the folder, the lawyer, or the accounts I'd locked down. I had stopped telling him anything at all. The next morning at 11:40, I was folding laundry at the kitchen table when my phone rang. Marcus's name lit up the screen. I picked up before the first ring even finished. Marcus. A short pause came over the line before he spoke. Brief, but unmistakable. George. When his voice finally came through, he didn't sound like the careful, calm detective I'd known these past few weeks. "Mrs. Corwin," he said, and the way he said, my name caused the clothes in my hands to drop straight to the floor. "I need you to sit down." "Sit down," Marcus repeated, his voice even softer this time. George. Only then did I realize I was still standing in the middle of the kitchen, laundry scattered around my feet. I sat down. My hands were trembling uncontrollably, so I pressed them flat against the table to force them still. "Terrell Boykins confessed this morning," Marcus said. "He laid out everything in exchange for a plea deal." George. "He gave up the name of the person who hired him and his accomplice to break into your home." "Who was it?" The question squeezed out of my throat so faint I could barely hear it myself. Marcus didn't answer right away. In that heavy silence, my mind did something ugly and fast. For one shameful second, my suspicions darted to Alton. George. Those 9 missing minutes, the porch light, everything flashed through my head. Deep down, a desperate, irrational thought flared up. Let it be him. Let it be anyone else. "It's your son," Marcus said. "Lavelle." Dead silence filled the kitchen. That can't be. I started but stopped because I couldn't find a rational way to finish the sentence. "Marcus, that's impossible. He's my son." George. "He came over the morning after it happened. He held me. He was terrified for me. I saw it on his face. I understand. I know how hard this is to take in. You don't understand anything. Are you telling me my own flesh and blood hired 2 men with weapons to?" I couldn't bring myself to say it out loud. "Mrs. Corwin, I would never bring you news like this based on just one person's word." George. He pushed a file toward me, handling it with the same extreme care he'd used with Dwayne's paperwork weeks ago. We pulled the cell tower records for the number that called Terrell twice that night. Triangulation showed a phone registered under your son's account was within a quarter-mile of a gas station off Highway 80 during both calls. George. Security footage shows Lavelle's truck parked at that exact station 20 minutes before each call, meeting briefly with a man matching Terrell's description. That could still just be... "There's more," Marcus continued. "The hardware store where your husband bought the new locks keeps digital records in their key cutting system. A few weeks after Dwayne passed, someone had a matching spare key made. George. It was paid for with a credit card under Lavelle's name. And then there's that inquiry letter from the title company you found. That investigation into your home's title, the one your husband never authorized, was sent from a business computer registered to your son's company." Marcus laid out the facts plainly. No dramatic flair, just letting each piece settle before presenting the next. George. The key that let them walk right into your home without forcing a single door or window. The phone that tipped them off on when to move. And the paperwork attempting to transfer your house out of your name, before anyone even got hurt. None of this is circumstantial when put together, Mrs. Corwin. Taken as a whole, it's an airtight case. I stared at the folder without opening it. Orch. I didn't need to look inside to know he was telling the truth. Marcus wasn't the kind of man to come into a grieving mother's kitchen with half-baked claims. Why? I asked quietly. Why would he do this to me? That's part of what we're still working to fully understand. But, Mrs. Corwin, he hesitated, genuinely struggling with how to phrase what came next. Orch, this might go deeper than just the break-in. I need you to prepare yourself. Deeper than the break-in. What does that mean? I'll explain everything I can very soon. Right now, I need to focus on what happens next. He closed the folder gently, as if it carried weight far beyond paper. We are preparing search and arrest warrants for your son. We could be moving on them as early as today. Orch. The room began to tilt, like the solid ground you'd walked on your whole life had suddenly given way without a sound. Today, I repeated. I wanted you to hear it from me first. Before it happens, before anyone else tells you. Long after he left, I remained sitting there, staring at the folder on the table. My son's face from the morning after the break-in replayed in my mind over and over. Orch, are you hurt? Did they lay a hand on you? As long as you're safe. Now, every single word sounded like a rehearsed line. Later that evening at 6:15, Lavelle was arrested at his office without incident. Marcus came to my house in person to deliver the news. He stood at the door, holding his hat, looking like a messenger forced to deliver terrible tidings. Orch, there's more you need to know, he said once I let him inside. I took my seat at the dining table again, the same table that had hosted every brutal conversation over the past month. During interrogation, Terrell mentioned something, Marcus said. He claimed Lavelle dropped a casual remark to him, almost boasting, about how easy things went last time. Last time. Orch. I heard myself repeat the words completely devoid of emotion. Before Marcus could even finish, I already knew where this was leading. We believe he was referring to your husband's death, Marcus said, keeping his tone as gentle as possible. Orch. Given the timeline, Dwayne passed away shortly after refusing to sign that power of attorney form and leaving that unsigned note. It's enough for us to officially reopen the investigation as a homicide. I sat motionless. In the weeks following the break-in, I'd managed to convince myself that the worst my son had done was try to harm me. I'd never allowed myself to entertain the darker possibility. Orch. That maybe he had already succeeded once before. He killed his father, I said, testing the weight of the words to see if they would break me. They didn't. At least not the way I expected. Instead, a bone-chilling numbness spread through my body. This isn't just one crime, is it, Marcus? It's two. I believe so, yes. Orch. He stayed for another hour, walking me through what would come next. Exhumation requests, new forensic reviews, and the slow, heavy gears of justice grinding back into motion, months after a death was ruled accidental. After Marcus left, Alton came over. Later than usual, carrying an aura that wasn't so much calm as it was attuned to the hollow void in my chest. Orch. Marcus called me too, he said, sitting down across from me. He told me they reopened Dwayne's case. You knew something was wrong with him all along, didn't you? It wasn't a question. I finally voiced the thought I'd been holding back for months. You knew before any of this happened. He didn't answer right away. Orch. He looked down at his hands with the expression of a man weighing how much truth he could afford to speak. I had my suspicions about Lavelle months ago, even before your husband passed, he finally admitted. If I'm being fully honest, it was several months back. Months? And you never said a single word to me. Because I didn't have solid proof to make a direct claim. Orch. He looked me in the eye, a careful restraint hidden behind his honesty. I promise you, Reginia, everything I've done since then was to make sure what happened to Dwayne wouldn't happen to you. What really happened the night you called me? Tell me everything, I pressed, finally forcing out the question I'd swallowed for weeks. How did you know to act so fast? Orch. That night, Marcus got a tip about unusual activity at your address. He called me because I'd raised concerns about Lavelle before. I didn't just take his word for it and blindly call your house. I drove down your street first. I saw a car parked near your house that didn't belong in the neighborhood. Those 9 minutes. Porch. The 9 minutes between Marcus calling me and me calling you were because I spent most of that time driving, not hesitating. He laid it out without a second thought. A tight string in my chest finally let go. I hadn't even realized how hard I was holding my breath. But along with that relief, I noticed his jaw remained set, his eyes drifting toward the window instead of looking at me. Porch. There's something else, isn't there? I said. Something you're still not telling me. Alton was silent for a long time. Now isn't the time, he said. Soon. I promise you. Soon. At noon, Marcus called to tell me they were laying everything out in front of Lavelle. The phone records, Terrell's confession, the unsigned power of attorney, and the reopened investigation into his father's death. Porch. I wanted you to know this was happening, he said. I can't share specific details from the interrogation room, but I wanted to tell you myself that the conversation has begun. I thanked him and hung up. Then I did the only thing I could do. Wait. That afternoon, I moved through the house like a drowning person, but I wasn't sitting idle. Porch. I called the probate lawyer to confirm that the final updates to my account documents had gone through. The beneficiary changes, the deed protection. These were deliberate defenses I could still hold on to tightly while everything else spiraled out of control. Porch. I checked the door locks Dwayne had replaced alone in the dark, understanding for the first time why he'd done it that way. Silently, without asking anyone. A stubborn part deep inside me kept hoping for a different outcome. That Marcus would call back and tell me this was all a huge mistake. I allowed myself that hope, but only for the duration of a phone call. Then I let it go. Porch. Because I had done everything I knew how to do to protect myself. That empty hope held no value anymore. Around 4 in the afternoon, Alton arrived. He didn't say much. He just sat at the table with me, not trying to make small talk or fill the silence with comfort I didn't need. Porch. He just stayed grounded right there, listening to the clock on my kitchen wall tick away the longest afternoon of my life. You don't have to talk, he said softly. I'm not going anywhere. My gratitude for those words was beyond measure. Just after 6, Marcus called again. I answered before the first ring finished. Where do things stand? I skipped the pleasantries. I had no patience left. Porch. He's still in there, Marcus said. I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Corwin. When we laid all the evidence, everything, out in front of him, he couldn't keep his composure like before. He started contradicting himself. Small details. Where he was that night, who he spoke to, when he last saw Terrell. None of it lined up with what he told us earlier. But he hasn't admitted to it yet. No, not yet. Porch. Not yet. Hearing those 2 words again in that exact order brought an unexpected wave of pain to my chest. Dwayne had said the exact same thing in our garage holding a screwdriver. I wish I had been wrong. Lavelle's entire life seemed built in that gray area between suspicion and confession. And now, I was back in that unbearable limbo, waiting once more. Porch. But sitting there, I realized I wasn't empty-handed anymore. I know how hard this is, Marcus said. I promise, the moment there's any update, you'll be the first to know. You keep promising me that, because I intend to keep my word. Long after hanging up, I remained sitting at the kitchen table. Porch. Alton sat across from me, and the house was so quiet I could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the next room. On the other side of town, my son was carrying the full weight of what he'd done. Yet, after everything, he still hadn't said the words. Porch. Sitting there, I didn't know if I wanted him to break down completely, or if a small, foolish voice inside me was still praying. He had nothing to confess to at all. An endless silence stretched out, and for the first time, I understood that not knowing the truth was a cruelty of its own. Crueler, even, than whatever lay behind the truth. Porch. That night, Marcus didn't call. He came to my house in person. Before he even sat down, I understood why. Some news is too heavy to deliver over a phone line, he confessed. Marcus said without preamble. knowing I needed none. Everything. I sat across from him, at that same dining table that had absorbed every brutal reality this month. George. I forced myself to ask the question I already knew the answer to. Both matters? Both. He admitted to hiring Terrell Boykins and another man to break into your home. The goal was never robbery. Marcus's voice stayed steady, though I could tell the effort it took to keep it that way. The scene was staged to look like a botched burglary. He wanted the outcome, George, to look just like what happened to your husband. Dwayne's death. Marcus, tell me everything. Plainly, I need to hear it clearly. He paused for a moment, then gave it to me straight, just as I requested. Your husband was taking blood pressure medication. George. Lavelle had Terrell swap several pills in the bottle with a different drug. One that causes a sudden severe drop in blood pressure, leading to dizziness and disorientation. He knew your husband checked the water heater in the basement every evening. Terrell was paid to ensure Dwayne took the swap pill that night before leaving. After that, your husband fell down the stairs on his own. George. No one even needed to push him. The medical examiner had no reason to run toxicology tests on an elderly man with a pre-existing heart condition. So, it was ruled an accidental fall. I sat with that reality for a long time. My husband gone for 4 months. Killed not by bad luck, but by the bottle in his own medicine cabinet. The bottle he'd trusted completely. Why, I asked. Not just how, but why. George. He told investigators your husband had recently updated beneficiary documents on 2 accounts, drastically stripping away Lavelle's access, and was discussing rewriting his will entirely once the power of attorney issue was resolved. Lavelle's exact words were that his father was preparing to cut him out completely. George. He figured if Dwayne died before those changes went into effect, the estate would default to you, and he could gain indirect control through the power of attorney form he kept trying to force you to sign. And he wanted to do the same to me, because I wouldn't sign either. That appears to be the exact truth. Yes. I thought of the folder still sitting untouched in the kitchen drawer for months. George. I thought of Lavelle's voice the morning after the break-in. Are you hurt? Did they lay a hand on you? As long as you're safe. Now, every single syllable was revealed as a performance. A man carefully rehearsing concern, when just the night before, he had personally sent intruders into my home. What happens now? I asked, needing something concrete to hold on to. George. With a full confession, prosecutors will lean toward a plea deal rather than a lengthy trial. It spares everyone months of court proceedings and secures a maximum sentence with 0 risk. Given the severity and premeditated nature of both crimes, they will be seeking life in prison. Life in prison? I repeated. Most likely, yes. I nodded slowly, feeling something inside my chest settle. George. It wasn't relief, but it wasn't just grief either. It was a specific searing pain, losing a husband and a son at the very same moment. One died from a lie I believed for 4 months. The other died from a truth I never wanted to know. When will I know this is truly over? Even with a confession, these proceedings move slower than people think. Sentencing could be months away. George, I'll walk with you through every step of the process. Marcus stood up to leave. If you need me, I'll be there. I appreciate it. He left shortly after. I sat alone in the kitchen for a long time, holding 2 distinct losses that turned out to be from the exact same wound. As for you, Dad, I tapped my fingers against the leather briefcase in my hands. George, your desire to protect your ego far outweighed your desire to protect your family. You leveraged the entire estate just to pretend you were still a real estate mogul. To avoid the public embarrassment of foreclosure, you even agreed to let Mom falsify my medical records just to steal my land. Marcus swallowed hard, a single bead of cold sweat running down his temple. George. Nia, please, he begged, his deep voice reduced to a pathetic whisper. This is your childhood home. We're your parents. You're my tenants now, I stated, every word dropping like an anvil. Apex holds the mortgage on this house. I am the bank, Marcus, and unlike the previous lenders, I have 0 interest in offering you any extra grace period. George. Valerie remained frozen near the shattered remains of the Ming vase. She looked at Brad sobbing on the grass, at Chloe trembling in absolute terror. She watched Marcus stripped of every ounce of his patriarchal authority. Her entire universe, that carefully crafted illusion of black excellence she had sacrificed her own daughter to maintain, was crumbling into a burning pile of debris right before her eyes. She realized she had no leverage left to bargain with, no money, no status, and absolutely no control over the daughter she had just threatened to commit to a psychiatric ward. She was left with only one final tactic of manipulation in her arsenal. Valerie let out a sharp, dramatic screech. She pressed her right hand theatrically to her forehead, swayed her hips, and let her knees give out. "Oh, God, my heart!" Valerie wailed, making sure everyone was watching before dropping backward onto the lawn, timing a feint perfectly to escape the consequences of her own actions. A heavy, dead silence hung over the lawn, broken only by the ragged breathing of the people who had spent the last hour trying to destroy me. Chloe remained on her knees, her hands shaking as she stared at my phone. She was waiting for me to make that call canceling the acquisition, waiting for me to instruct David and the Apex legal team to magically erase $40 million in corporate debt due to some sudden biological excuse. She truly believed playing the family card was her ultimate trump card, capable of forcing me back into the role of a compliant, submissive younger sister. I looked down at my phone screen, confirming my connection was completely secure. I didn't open my contacts to call my legal team. Nor did I look at David, who stood by the helicopter with absolute, unwavering loyalty to my orders. I looked straight into Chloe's eyes, filled with tears and desperation. Your so-called family pressure isn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for corporate fraud, Chloe, I stated, my voice echoing with chilling clinical detachment. It doesn't erase the fact that you stood in that living room, actively scheming to sell out your parents. It doesn't erase how enthusiastically you supported falsifying my medical records to lock me in a psychiatric ward. You were fully prepared to destroy my entire existence to fund your lavish lifestyle, and now you expect me to sacrifice my company's assets to cover up your mistakes. Chloe let out a loud, dramatic sob, clutching the hem of her ruined designer dress. Nia, please, you don't understand. The pressure of bankruptcy will ruin my family. How can you be so utterly heartless? I'm not ruining anyone's life, I corrected her, my tone razor sharp. Brad ruined your life. He falsified financial statements for his venture firm to lure my parents into a predatory real estate deal. Your husband is a thief, and he got caught trying to rob an apex predator. I'm simply carrying out standard corporate debt collection procedures. If you truly care about creating a stable environment for your future, I suggest you start looking for a skilled divorce attorney instead of begging me to cover your husband's massive legal liabilities. Brad struggled to his feet, his face flushed red with extreme humiliation and sudden, defensive rage. Realizing begging wouldn't work, the sheer embarrassment of watching his wife crawl in the dirt finally broke through his panic. You can't do this, Brad shouted, pointing a trembling finger at me. You can't just seize Vanguard Capital. I have institutional investors. I have a board of directors. Federal law has rules against hostile takeovers. I'll drag your company through antitrust litigation for a decade. You think you can destroy my firm just because you hold a grudge over a family feud? I will ruin you in federal court. Turning my attention to Brad, ready to deliver the final, fatal blow to his entire career, I felt a deep, genuine sense of satisfaction. You won't be setting foot in a federal civil court, Brad, I answered, my voice dropping to a dangerous, authoritative hum. You're going to be far too busy defending yourself in court against federal criminal charges. Brad froze, his arms slowly falling to his sides. His aggressive stance evaporated instantly, replaced by a terrifying new level of fear. I tapped my phone screen and held it up, letting the sun's glare illuminate the numerical confirmation receipt on the display. Earlier today, when my legal team audited Vanguard Capital's distressed assets, we didn't just find your $40 million deficit, I explained, watching absolute terror wash over his face. Orch. We also uncovered the fraudulent prospectus you drafted for this specific land acquisition. We found the forged valuations you submitted to private investors to cover up your massive losses. To push this deal through, you committed aggressive, intentional wire fraud. Orch. And because my firm operates with absolute transparency, I have already instructed my CFO to package every single piece of evidence regarding your financial crimes. I paused, letting the full weight of my words press heavily down on the ruined lawn. By the time we stood in the courtroom, 4 months had passed since Lavelle's arrest. Orch. 4 months of postponements and paperwork, during which Marcus had gently warned me more than once that the wheels of justice turn far slower than a grieving heart wishes. The courtroom was colder than I expected, though I doubted it had much to do with the air conditioning, and more to do with what I was there to witness. Orch. I wore the navy blue dress Dwayne had always loved, a dress I hadn't touched since his funeral. Marcus sat beside me on the hard wooden bench, close enough to offer silent reassurance without either of us needing to explain why he was there. Lavelle sat on the other side of the courtroom in a county jail jumpsuit next to his attorney. Orch. Weeks earlier, he had accepted a plea deal, pleading guilty to all charges in exchange for the state dropping the death penalty request in his father's murder. He didn't look like a monster. That was the most painful part. He just looked like my son, thinner and more exhausted than I remembered, staring fixedly at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Orch. Before sentencing, the judge asked if the victim's family wished to speak. Marcus squeezed my hand as I stood up. I hadn't written a speech. I didn't believe words on paper could carry what I needed to say. My husband trusted his son with everything he owned. My voice was steadier than I felt inside. And that very trust killed him. I don't stand here today asking for vengeance. Orch. I stand here hoping the court understands that what my son took wasn't property, money, or a house. He took a father from a family, and he tried to take a mother the exact same way. At 61 years old, I had to learn to feel afraid in my own home. No sentence can restore the peace I lost. But I want to know that no other mother will ever have to learn that kind of fear the way I did. Orch. Lavelle never turned to look at me, not once. I couldn't tell if it was out of shame or because he simply had nothing left to say. Given the gravity and premeditated nature of these crimes, the judge finally declared, under the terms of the negotiated plea agreement, this court sentences the defendant to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Life in prison. Orch. When those words landed, they didn't shatter me as I had braced for. They simply settled heavy and final into the space I had cleared for them over those 4 grueling months. Before adjourning, the judge added one final ruling. Under Alabama's Slayer statute, anyone convicted of causing the death of a parent forfeits all rights to inherit any property from that parent's estate. Orch. Whatever Lavelle hoped to gain from his father, the law just ensured he'd never touch a single cent of it. Out on the marble steps of the courthouse, Marcus stood with me in the afternoon breeze, giving me a moment to catch my breath. "You did great in there," he said. That statement took a tremendous amount of courage. I didn't feel very brave. Courage isn't a feeling, Mrs. Corwin. Orch. Moving forward even when you're terrified. That's courage. I thanked him for everything he'd done. He told me to call him anytime if I needed anything, then walked over to his car, leaving me alone on the cold steps. Alton was waiting by my car. "How are you doing?" he asked, though it sounded like he already knew the answer wouldn't be simple. "It's over," I said. "He's gone. It's really over." "Good." Orch. His jaw stayed tight as he glanced back at the courthouse steps, looking like he was bracing himself for something. "Reginia, there's something I have to tell you. Now that this part is finally over, Alton, you're making me nervous." "I know." He looked me right in the eye. For the first time since we bumped into each other at the grocery store, I saw a look on his face I'd never seen before. George, can we find somewhere to sit down? I don't want to talk about this in a parking lot. We sat in a booth at a little diner 2 blocks from the courthouse, far away from the lunch crowd. Alton held a cup of coffee tightly, in both, not taking a single sip. My real name is Alton Winford, he began. That part was never a lie. George. But I wasn't just a passerby who happened to notice you at the grocery store, Reginia. I need you to know that before you hear the rest. My stomach tightened, bracing for a truth I didn't have a name for yet. Gavin sat in the leather chair of that sleek broadcast booth, deliberately wearing a cheap, wrinkled shirt to make himself look broke and beaten down. George. Leaning into the high-end microphone, he actually managed to squeeze out a few tears. In front of over 3 million live viewers, Gavin completely rewrote our entire history. Looking straight into the camera, he painted me as a cold, calculating, sociopathic billionaire. He told the host that throughout our entire marriage, I had maliciously hidden my immense wealth just to set a trap for him. George. He claimed I was a corporate tyrant who used my money and hacker connections to frame his sweet, innocent mother for child abuse, he cried, claiming I had forged federal evidence purely out of revenge to ruin his brother-in-law. Then came his most sickening lie of all. George. He sobbed on camera, saying I used my private security detail to forcibly kidnap his newborn daughter, threatening to kill him if he ever tried to see her again. It was an absolute masterpiece of fiction. Gavin played the helpless, loving father ruined by an evil, ultra-wealthy feminist to perfection. The internet's reaction was instant and explosive. George. The live chat box scrolling next to the video stream moved so fast it was just a blur of text. The online mob was fully activated, screaming for my head. Social media platforms were instantly flooded with viral clips of Gavin weeping. Trending topics demanded a full investigation into my company. George. People called for boycotts, wildly tagging federal agencies, demanding my arrest for parental kidnapping. Back in my office, the atmosphere was chaotic. My public relations director, David, a seasoned crisis management expert, was pacing nervously across the expensive carpet. His tablet buzzed non-stop with alerts from news outlets demanding an official statement. George. Sydney, our reputation is taking a devastating hit right now, David warned, his voice tight with anxiety. If this stays trending for another hour, company stock is going to plummet. We need to release a hard-hitting official press release immediately. George. We need our legal team at that studio right now, slapping the host and his entire podcast network with a massive defamation lawsuit and a cease and desist order before Gavin says another word. I looked away from my monitor and gently adjusted the pink blanket wrapped around my peacefully sleeping daughter. I didn't feel a shred of panic. I wasn't threatened by millions of angry strangers online. George. They were just reacting to a ghost story told by a desperate liar, and I knew precisely how to make the entire room go quiet. Sit down and take a deep breath, David, I said, my voice completely steady without a hint of pressure. We're not issuing a standard PR statement, and we're not sending a cease and desist to that podcast network. That's exactly what Gavin wants. George. He wants a drawn-out legal battle in the public eye so he can use a victim narrative to milk donations and sympathy. David stopped pacing and stared at me, dumbfounded. Then what are we supposed to do? He's broadcasting live to millions right now. I smiled and turned my focus back to my computer terminal. George. I typed in a rapid sequence of commands, bypassing the standard desktop interface to log directly into my top-tier offshore financial portal. When you have a pest problem in your building, you don't politely ask the landlord to fix it, I explained, my fingers flying across the glowing keyboard. You buy the whole building and demolish it yourself. George. I pulled up the corporate registration data for the podcast network. The host didn't own his show outright. He was signed under a larger independent digital media group in Texas. And over the past 3 quarters, that parent company had been struggling with slumping ad revenue. They were extremely vulnerable. George. I established a direct encrypted channel with my senior acquisition team and gave them a simple, hyper-aggressive command. I want absolute controlling interest in that media group. And to execute this hostile takeover immediately, I am willing to pay a 30% premium above market value. In under 12 minutes, the deal was done. I authorized an 8-figure wire transfer directly from my private holding company. Before Gavin could even finish his second sob story on air, the digital contract was signed, sealed, and legally binding. I spun my chair around to face my utterly stunned PR director. "Stand the lawyers down, David," I instructed, getting up and carefully handing Lily to her trusted private nanny. "We don't need to sue that podcast network, because as of 60 seconds ago, legally, I own it." I grabbed my tailored suit jacket off the back of my chair and slipped it on, keeping my eyes locked on the live stream, where Gavin was now begging viewers to donate to his legal defense fund. "Have my driver bring the car to the front entrance," I ordered, a cold, predatory smile spreading across my face. "I'm going to pay my new employees a surprise visit, and I'm going to take this show off the air permanently, live on broadcast." The drive to the studio took less than 20 minutes. Sitting in the back of the armored vehicle, I watched the live stream on my phone as Gavin kept weaving his pathetic web of lies. He was crying real hard now, dabbing his dry eyes with a tissue, telling millions of viewers he just wanted to be a good father. He claimed my corporate lawyers were hunting him down to silence him. He had no idea how right he was about the hunting part. But I didn't need lawyers to shut him up. I was going to do it myself. The studio was located inside a sleek, renovated industrial warehouse in downtown Atlanta. My driver pulled right up to the front entrance, escorted by 2 elite security guards. I stepped out, strode through the glass doors, and walked straight past the reception desk. A panicked studio manager rushed out of a side office, waving a clipboard and shouting that this was a closed set. I didn't even slow my pace. I simply handed him the digital acquisition papers I'd printed right before leaving my office. I watched the color drain completely from his face as he realized the woman walking past him was the new legal owner of his entire media group. His clipboard hit the floor, and he backed away without uttering another word. I walked toward the heavy, soundproof door of the main studio. A bright red on-air light flashed in the hallway. I didn't wait for a commercial break. I shoved the heavy door open and stepped right onto the brightly lit set. Gavin was sitting in a plush leather armchair close to the high-end microphone. He was mid-sentence, complaining about how family courts always favor rich, manipulative women. Hearing the door open, he turned his head. When Gavin saw me standing in the studio, the words died right in his throat. His jaw dropped. The fake tears on his face dried up instantly, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The podcast host, a loud, wildly arrogant man who made a living attacking women, instantly stood up. Pointing at me angrily, he yelled for his production crew to cut the cameras and call security to throw this crazy woman out. I didn't stop. I walked straight up to the host's desk and slammed a high-definition tablet heavily onto the glass surface. "Keep the cameras rolling," I commanded, my voice carrying clearly through the studio microphones to the millions watching live, and no one is calling security. Exactly 14 minutes ago, my private holding company acquired the parents this network. I am your boss now. You work for me. If you cut this broadcast feed, you and your entire production team are fired on the spot. The host froze. He looked past the glass into the control room. The studio manager had just walked in, giving the host a terrified nod, confirming every single word I said was absolute truth. The host slowly sank back into his chair, rendered completely powerless in his own studio. I turned my attention to Gavin. He was dripping with sweat, his hands gripping the armrests so hard his knuckles were stark white. He looked like a deer trapped in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. "You wanted a massive public audience, Gavin," I said, looking straight into his terrified eyes. You wanted to broadcast your personal family drama to millions of strangers on the internet. I think that's a brilliant idea. But if we're going to tell a story, let's tell the truth. I looked at the host and pointed to the tablet. Plug that tablet into your main feed and mirror the screen onto the live stream right now. The host didn't dare argue. Hands trembling, he grabbed a high-speed data cable and connected my tablet directly to the studio's main switcher. The massive digital display behind the desk flickered, and my screen was instantly broadcast to over 3 million viewers worldwide. I tapped the first file. Ultra-high-definition 4K footage of the nursery filled every screen. The entire internet watched in utter shock as Brenda snuck into the dimly lit room. They watched her crush adult sedatives and sweep the heavy powder directly into my newborn baby's formula. The live chat box, which had been wildly supporting Gavin 2 minutes ago, ground to a complete halt in collective shock. Then the video jumped. Viewers saw me holding my crying baby. The studio speakers amplified the sharp, violent slap as Brenda's hand struck my face. They heard Brenda's vicious voice commanding me to shut the baby up so Gavin could sleep. They heard the sickening thud as Lily hit the hardwood floor. Worst of all, they heard Gavin's impatient voice from the bed, complaining about his business pitch and ordering me to get his unconscious baby out of the room because she was annoying him. Gavin recoiled in his chair, ripping the microphone off his collar. He waved his hands frantically, screaming at the camera that the video was a deep fake, claiming I used artificial intelligence to frame his innocent mother. I didn't give him a chance to finish that pathetic lie. Tapping the tablet screen again, I opened the audio file I'd extracted from his encrypted work phone the week before. Let's listen to how this grieving, selfless father talks about his family, I announced loudly. The recording played over the studio sound system. It was a call between Gavin and his mistress, Amber. Viewers heard Gavin's arrogant laugh. They heard him mapping out details to transfer hundreds of thousands of dollars from his startup into Cayman Island accounts. They heard him promising Amber he was about to dump his freeloading wife and crying baby to move into a luxury penthouse with her. The live chat scrolling on the studio monitors went completely nuclear. The audience turned instantly. The very crowd Gavin had tried to weaponize against me was now tearing him to shreds at light speed. They called him a monster, a liar, a pathetic coward. The chat scrolled at a terrifying pace, filled with pure, unadulterated rage, all directed at him. Gavin was hyperventilating. Sweat poured down his face, soaking the collar of his cheap shirt. He looked around the studio, finally realizing there was no escape from the public execution I had just orchestrated. His reputation wasn't just damaged. It was permanently erased on a global scale. I walked around the desk, stepping right into Gavin's personal space. The cameras captured every second of his total humiliation. Looking down at him, I picked up the studio microphone he'd dropped and brought it to my lips. I promised you I would make you face the consequences of your actions, Gavin. I whispered coldly into the microphone, ensuring millions of viewers heard only my voice. I looked down at his trembling, broken frame. Check your email, Gavin. Gavin swallowed hard, his eyes darting in terror. With shaking, clumsy fingers, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his smartphone. The screen lit up with a top priority notification. I watched his eyes scan the subject line of the email. It was an official notice from the United States Department of Justice. Gavin let out a weak, agonizing gasp. The smartphone slipped from his trembling hands and hit the studio floor with a sharp crack. It was a formal federal indictment for massive wire fraud and embezzlement involving his startup company. The walls had completely closed in. Gavin finally realized he was never, ever walking out of this nightmare. The federal indictment for massive wire fraud hit the headlines instantly, turning Gavin into an international pariah overnight. His startup was dead, his reputation wiped out, and every single one of his financial accounts frozen by the federal government. I'm a private investigator. Been doing this for nearly 20 years. He read my face carefully as if expecting the words to hit like a punch. Dwayne hired me about 2 weeks before he passed away. Hired you? I repeated slowly, letting the reality settle in. For what? He came to me concerned about Lavelle, said something felt off. He didn't have proof, just a gut feeling. He wanted someone to look into things quietly. So that run-in at the grocery store, that wasn't a coincidence either, was it? No. I was looking for a way to get close to you, to figure out how much you knew without scaring you off. I leaned back against the booth seat, needing the physical distance more than I cared to admit. So every dinner, every evening you sat at my table, to you, I was just part of an assignment? That didn't last long, maybe just the first week. After that, it had nothing to do with Lavelle. He reached a hand across the table toward me, but stopped short, laying it flat on the wood. I know that doesn't erase how it started. No, I said, it doesn't. I let silence stretch between us for a moment. He sat completely still through it, not rushing to smooth things over with an easy resolution. A part of me should have been angrier than I felt. But another part knew I had earned the right to take my time in deciding just how angry I wanted to be. Why didn't you tell me after everything was over, after we grew so close? I asked. I told you things I hadn't said to anyone. Because I was being a coward, if I'm being honest. I told myself I was protecting you from an allegation I couldn't prove yet. But part of it was just fear. Fear of losing you before I ever had a chance to hold on to you. He finally looked me dead in the eye. I'm not here tonight to ask for your forgiveness. I just needed you to hear the truth directly from me. All of it. Before anyone else tried to sell you another version. That's a fair request, I said carefully. But it doesn't mean I'm ready to forgive you. I know. I thought about the porch light, those 9 missing minutes, and the man who spent months quietly carrying out a late friend's request without ever asking for credit. At the same time, I thought about how much of my life, over these past months, had been decided by men. Men deciding what I needed to know, and when I needed to know it. Dwayne used silence to protect me. Lavelle used lies to control me. And now Alton, however gently, had done a version of the same thing through omission. I appreciate what you've done, I said, picking my words carefully, but I still don't know how I feel about how you did it. I need time, Alton. I can't give you an answer today. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere unless you tell me to leave. I nodded. We sat in the booth a little longer, neither of us reaching to hold the other's hand. Walking out of that diner alone, I came to realize something I hadn't allowed myself to accept until now. I survived the loss of my husband. I survived the betrayal of my own son. And through the hardest moments of it all, I stood on my own 2 feet. Not because a man warned me just in time, but because every time I fell, I made the choice to stand up and keep moving forward. Whatever decision I eventually reached about Alton, the resilience and independence inside me weren't things anyone could give me. They were entirely my own.